She had just lost $1 million at the poker table when the man across from her, quiet, unreadable, reached into his stack, covered her debt, and said, "You don't belong here, and I don't mean that as an insult." Kate didn't breathe. Her shoulders locked. The other players around the table exchanged smirks. One of them, the smug one in the silver watch, chuckled under his breath. She wanted to sink into the velvet of her chair and vanish. Her chips were gone. Her hand was garbage. Her luck, if she'd ever had any, had bled out hours ago. But it wasn't just the $500,000 in chips she had lost. It was the other half, a desperate loan made under the table from a man named Richie Legrand, who didn't smile much but never needed to. Richie had slid the chips her way earlier that night without fanfare, whispering, "Win it back. 10% if you do, 30 if you don't." She hadn't thought twice. She was already in too deep. The inheritance her grandmother left had been broken into pieces by probate and legal vultures. Kate thought she was smart enough to flip it before it disappeared completely. Just one smart move. One hand, one comeback. But now, it was gone. All of it. Kate's breath was shallow as she stared at the felt table, numb. Her grandmother's house in Vermont, the last piece of family land, had been sold a few months ago. The jewelry went next. She'd held on to the money like a lifeline, thinking she'd buy time. But time wasn't what the world dealt her. The dealer's voice broke the silence. "Debt cleared." "What?" Richie snapped, jerking in his seat. The chips had already been pushed toward the center. Daniel Vale, the stranger who hadn't spoken all night, sat back in his chair as if none of this touched him. "I paid it," Daniel said, glancing sideways at Richie without a hint of emotion. "She's done." "That wasn't part of the game," Richie hissed. "No, it was extortion," Daniel replied evenly. "But don't worry, you got your money." Kate turned toward Daniel, stunned. "Why would you do that?" His gaze met hers. Calm. Steady. "Because I've seen where this road ends." She opened her mouth to protest, to accuse him of something, pity, manipulation, whatever this was. But the words died before they could form. Her throat burned. Her hands were cold. "You should leave," Daniel added, standing. "Before the next person offers you another loan." She stood, swaying slightly, and grabbed her purse like it was the last thing anchoring her. Her heels clicked against the floor as she made her way out, eyes blurry, blood rushing in her ears. She didn't look back. Outside the poker room, the casino's air was colder, more artificial. Everything was glitter and noise, but none of it reached her. Kate found a marble bench near a decorative fountain and sank down, burying her face in her hands. $1 million gone. Daniel Vale hadn't returned to Vermont in nearly 12 years. He stood now on the edge of the old trail that bordered the cottage, Kate's grandmother's cottage, watching leaves fall like quiet reminders of time he couldn't rewind. The air here didn't smell like smoke or money or alcohol. It smelled like damp wood, clean soil, and the past. Inside his jacket pocket was a photo, faded, torn on the edge. A wise woman with white curls and laugh lines, Margaret Ellison. Next to her, a much younger version of him, hollow-eyed, thin, and grateful beyond words. "If you ever find my granddaughter lost," Margaret had told him that day, "don't try to save her. Just remind her who she is. She'll do the rest." He had nodded like he understood. He hadn't, not fully, not until last night, when he saw Kate at the table. The way she sat too straight, the way she bluffed with hope instead of cards, the way her pride wouldn't let her leave. Margaret's granddaughter, all grown up and drowning. He remembered the first time Margaret found him. He'd been sleeping behind a community center dumpster, bleeding from a fight over a stolen wallet. Instead of calling the cops, she brought him tea. Instead of judging him, she handed him a bar of soap and a clean towel. She had rules, though, kind ones, but firm. Wake up early, wash your hands, don't lie to yourself, and if you mess up, own it. Those were the rules that pulled Daniel from the edge of a needle and into a job, a room, a routine. He hadn't gambled then, not yet. He just tried not to disappear. Margaret hadn't been rich, but she had something rarer, clarity. She saw people for what they were capable of, not what they'd done. When she told him about her granddaughter Kate, Her eyes lit up. "She's brilliant," she had said, smiling. "She writes stories in notebooks and memorizes the presidents in order. I swear she's going to rule the world one day." Now that same girl had borrowed money from Richie Legrand and sat shaking at a poker table. Daniel had watched her for an hour before he realized who she was. She looked like Margaret around the eyes, but harder, guarded, like someone who'd learned not to trust herself anymore. Kate barely remembered getting home. Her apartment was mostly boxes, unopened mail, and furniture that didn't belong to her. She had been couch-hopping between cities for months, and the lease here was more of a formality than a home. She dropped her bag by the door and collapsed onto the floor beside her mattress. That man, Daniel. Why had he done it? She didn't know him. She hadn't even spoken to him. And yet he'd covered her debt, silently, cleanly, and with a single sentence that wouldn't stop echoing in her mind. "You don't belong here." She wasn't sure if it was a warning or a compliment. In the morning, she found herself at a cafe she hadn't been to since high school. It used to be her favorite spot, the one her grandmother would take her to after dance recitals and dentist appointments. She ordered hot chocolate, not coffee, just like before. It was crowded, and she didn't notice him until he was already at her table. Daniel sat down without asking. "Mind if I join you?" Kate stared at him. "You already joined me at the poker table. Might as well complete the set." He didn't smile, but his eyes warmed a fraction. "Fair enough." She waited. "Are you here to collect a thank you, or explain why you bailed out a stranger for no reason?" "I don't want to thank you," he said. "And I didn't do it for no reason." "So what then?" He looked at her for a long moment. "You remind me of someone I once owed a lot to." Kate scoffed. "What is this, some kind of karmic redemption tour?" Daniel leaned forward. "You ever wonder how people end up in rooms like that, with sharks and cheats circling them?" Kate stiffened. "I was just trying to—" "I know," he said, cutting her off gently. "Fix something, make something right, solve a mess you didn't start." She looked away. "I didn't ask for help." "No, you didn't," Daniel said. "But you needed it." The words struck harder than she expected. She hadn't cried in months, not during the hearings, not when the house was sold, not when she wrote the check to the IRS. But now, with this stranger sipping black coffee and looking at her like she wasn't pathetic, something cracked. Kate blinked quickly. "Who was she?" Daniel tilted his head. "The person I remind you of." He said nothing, but in his silence, she felt a shift. 1 week later, Kate stood at the edge of a bridge in the park, not the dangerous kind, just a quiet overlook she used to go to with her grandmother. There was a tree there with initials carved into it, K+M. She used to believe that if she could just be good, just follow the rules, the world would reward her. She had been such a good kid, top of her class, tutor to younger students, volunteered at shelters. Her grandmother used to call her Sunlight. Somewhere along the way, the light dimmed. She had been the girl who held the door open for strangers, who sent thank-you notes, who read books before bed. But life chipped away at her. First her parents' debts, then the divorce, then the pressure to make money fast, and now, poker tables and strangers covering her losses. Daniel walked up behind her. "You don't have to talk," he said. Kate didn't turn. "I used to be good." "You still are." She shook her head. "You don't know me." "I knew your grandmother." She turned sharply. "What?" Daniel stepped beside her, calm, measured. "I met her a long time ago when I had nothing. She helped me, and she told me about you." Kate stared. "How long have you known who I was?" "I figured it out the night of the game," he said. "But yes, I knew of you before that." Kate looked away, overwhelmed. "She told me," he said quietly, "if you ever lost your way, I should help you remember who you were. Not fix you, not carry you, just remind you." Her throat tightened. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I didn't want you to think I saw you as a charity case." Kate pressed her lips together. Her voice trembled. Did she really believe in me that much?" "She believed in you more than anyone I've ever met." Later that night, Kate sat on her mattress, reading one of her old journals she hadn't touched in years. Her handwriting had been neater back then. her thoughts more innocent. April 9th. Today Grandma said I was going to make the world brighter. I hope she's right. I hope I don't let her down. The tears came silently this time, cleansing. In the morning she bought a notebook. Blank pages. New start. Kate never expected rock bottom to feel quiet. She thought it would be louder, screaming, breaking things, people storming out. But instead, her rock bottom came with quiet mornings, half-empty coffee mugs, and an odd sort of stillness, like a lake that finally stopped rippling after the stone sank. She didn't reach out to Daniel again. She didn't have to. He showed up when she needed him most, always just close enough, never too much. At first, she didn't know how to be around him. There was something about his calm presence that disarmed her defenses, which had been up so long she forgot they weren't part of her personality. He didn't offer advice unless she asked. He didn't pity her. He never once called her strong like some backhanded compliment. He just showed up, quiet, grounded, and steady. That first week, he met her at a small community cafe she used to love. She ordered tea. He brought a chessboard. "You play?" she asked. "Badly," he said. "But I figured learning something with no stakes might feel different." Kate stared at the board for a long moment, then nodded. "Teach me." He smiled. "You sure? Losing might damage your ego." "I don't think I have an ego left," she muttered, and Daniel didn't argue. They played every Tuesday. She got better. He stopped letting her win. And somehow, between checkmates and missed pawns, she began to rebuild. Kate found an old notebook tucked in a drawer at her grandmother's apartment. She didn't remember bringing it with her, but there it was, blue spiral spine, pages still crisp. On the front, in faded Sharpie, Kate's great ideas. Inside were doodles and half-written poems from when she was 14. She flipped through, smiling faintly. Some were ridiculous. One was a pitch for a smoothie stand in outer space. Another was a letter to Oprah. Then she found a note she'd written to herself. "Dear future me, please still be kind. Please don't turn cold. Remember how it feels to help someone. Remember Grandma's laugh. Remember your worth is not how much you make, but how much you give." Kate closed the notebook and held it to her chest for a long time. The next morning, she started writing again. She found a job at a local bookstore 2 weeks later. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. She didn't tell Daniel at first. She wanted one thing, just one, that she got on her own. When he stopped by the shop on a rainy Thursday, she raised an eyebrow. "Following me?" "No," he said, "just buying a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird like a perfectly average human man." She smirked. "Sure." He looked around. "This place suits you." Kate didn't know why that made her throat tighten, but it did. She glanced at the worn floorboards and the chalkboard menu with quotes. "It's quiet, and full of things I don't have to fix." They sat at the window and shared coffee. She told him about a customer who had tried to return a cookbook because it didn't taste good. He laughed, a real laugh. "I used to love making people laugh," she said without thinking. He glanced at her. "You still do." On a Sunday afternoon, Kate returned to the shelter her grandmother used to volunteer at. The place hadn't changed. Same peeling blue paint. Same woman at the front desk, Marla, who hugged her tightly and said, "Margaret'd be proud to see you back." Kate helped serve soup, clean up crafts, and read to kids in the corner library. She felt rusty, but something inside her stirred, something old and good. That night, she called Daniel. "I did something today," she said, sitting cross-legged on the floor. "Good something or illegal something?" She smiled. "The good kind." And she told him. Things between them never felt forced. That was the scariest part. Daniel never pushed, never demanded. He wasn't trying to impress her, and he never tried to solve her problems. Instead, he gave her space to try and fail and try again. When she talked, he listened. When she cried, he didn't rush to wipe it away. He was just there. And maybe that was why it began to feel dangerous, because she was starting to look forward to his voice, his presence, the way he looked at her like she was capable, even when she didn't believe it herself. But she wasn't ready, not yet. and Daniel somehow seemed to know that. One night, everything shifted. Kate was walking home from work when she ran into Brent, her ex. He was leaning against her building like he owned the block. Same smirk, same expensive shoes. She felt her stomach tighten. "Well, look who finally picked up a day job," he said. Kate kept walking. "I'm not in the mood," Brent followed. "You used to be smarter than this. Flipping inheritance money at poker tables? What happened to that big plan of yours?" She turned sharply. You and your amazing advice about how the fastest way to fix my life was to take stupid risks." Brent laughed. "Hey, you didn't have to listen." She stared at him for a long moment, then said, "You're right, and that's on me." He raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" Kate took a step forward. "I made those choices. I listened to you. I ignored my instincts. But I'm not doing that anymore. So if you're here to watch me fall again, you're going to be disappointed." Brent blinked. She didn't wait for a reply. She walked upstairs and didn't look back. Her hands were still shaking when she got inside. She sat on the couch and dialed Daniel. "Everything okay?" he asked. She paused. "I stood up for myself tonight." He was quiet for a second, then, "Good. How did it feel?" Kate exhaled. "Terrifying and incredible." A few days later, Daniel invited her to a jazz night at a small, dimly lit bar. The music was soft, the people were quiet, the kind of place you could have a real conversation. She wore a blue dress, not to impress him, just because it made her feel like someone she used to be. They sat near the stage. The singer's voice floated around them like velvet. Halfway through, Daniel said, "You're different." Kate raised an eyebrow. "In a good way?" "In a real way," he replied. She smiled. "You helped." He shook his head. "No, you let yourself grow." They fell into silence, comfortable. Then, after a pause, Daniel said something she didn't expect. "Can I tell you a secret?" She nodded. "I'm scared of this." Kate tilted her head. "This?" "Us, or the idea of it. I've spent most of my life avoiding anything I couldn't control. Feelings, attachments, people I could actually lose." Kate's heart beat faster. "But you," he exhaled, "you make me want to risk it." She didn't say anything for a long time. Then, "I'm scared too." He smiled, and it was the softest she'd ever seen him. "Then maybe we can be scared together." The next morning, Kate went for a walk, alone. No headphones, no destination. She ended up at a garden she used to visit as a child. There was a bench her grandmother had once painted. It was chipped now, faded, but still standing. Kate sat, pulled out her notebook, and wrote, "I am not broken, I am in progress, and for the first time in years, I like who I'm becoming." Kate stood in the kitchen of her apartment, staring at a pan of scorched eggs, like it had personally betrayed her. She'd forgotten the stove was on. Again. Smoke curled lazily into the air, but she didn't move. The window was open, letting in the faint sound of traffic and a few kids yelling across the street. It felt far away, like background noise in a life she wasn't fully living anymore. There was too much noise in her head. Daniel had been perfect, too perfect, present without pushing, supportive without smothering, and for a while she thought that was what she needed. After the crash of everything, her inheritance, her family's silence, the long, hollow ache of losing herself, he had appeared like a shelter, like a hand she hadn't even realized she was reaching for. But lately, something about their rhythm had started to feel off. It was in the way he looked at her when she made mistakes, not with judgment, not with anger, but with something quieter, heavier. Hope. Like he was waiting for the old Kate to snap back into place. The girl who volunteered on weekends, who wrote poems and sent handwritten birthday cards. The girl who didn't raise her voice in frustration, the girl her grandmother believed in. But Kate wasn't sure that girl still existed. They'd been spending time together almost daily, quiet afternoons reading at the library, walks with no destination, long talks about grief, guilt, and grace. At first it felt like healing, like returning to something real, but now it felt more like rehearsing for a version of herself that someone else had written. A few days ago, Daniel complimented an old drawing she made when she was younger. "You really were something special," he'd said. She'd smiled too, but it didn't reach her eyes. That night alone she cried, not because of the compliment, but because she wasn't sure if he saw her as something special now, or only what she used to be. The next morning, she skipped their usual coffee meeting. No explanation, just a quiet absence. Daniel didn't press, he never did. That was the worst part. He gave her space without blame, and it only made the distance feel sharper. She spent the day wandering the city, stopping at places she hadn't visited in years. The community garden near the park, the used bookstore where she'd worked in college, the overlook where she and her grandmother used to sit with bagged lunches and talk about everything and nothing. She ended up there at sunset, sitting on the cold stone bench, arms wrapped around her knees. The wind pulled at her hair, and the sky blushed with color. It was beautiful, but it didn't bring peace, just more ache. Daniel wanted her to be whole, that was clear. He wanted her to be strong, gentle, capable, kind. The girl he imagined her to be, probably based on stories her grandmother had told him. Probably based on who she used to be before the cracks showed. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She had jagged edges now, bruises that hadn't faded, regrets with names and dates and amounts she could list from memory. She'd hurt people. She'd lied to herself. She'd gambled away not just money, but faith, her grandmother's faith, her own. And yet, Daniel still looked at her like she was a story in progress, a redemption arc he could help complete. It felt like a gift, and a trap. She stared at her shoes, voice barely audible. "I don't know who I'm supposed to be for him." The wind didn't answer. She went home, opened her journal and wrote, "Am I becoming someone better, or just someone he finds easier to love?" She closed the notebook and shoved it into the drawer. Then she turned off the stove, dumped the burnt eggs in the trash, and sat on the floor in silence, her back against the cabinets. The next day Daniel called. She didn't answer. He left a message anyway. "Hey, no pressure, just checking in. Hope you're okay." She listened to it twice, then deleted it. There was nothing wrong. That was the strangest part. He hadn't betrayed her. He hadn't lied. He hadn't done anything but believe in her, but that belief had started to feel like weight. That afternoon she found herself at the bookstore cafe with a half-eaten bagel and a journal she hadn't touched since the night before. The page still stared up at her like a dare. Am I becoming someone better, or just someone he finds easier to love? She tapped the pen against the margin, then began writing underneath. He listens. He cares. He waits for me to bloom again. But what if the girl he's waiting for doesn't exist anymore? What if I'm not a flower anymore? What if I'm something harder, messier, colder, and still worthy? She sat with that for a long time. That weekend, Daniel invited her to a Sunday poetry reading at the museum. They hadn't seen each other in 4 days. She hesitated, then agreed. Partly out of guilt, partly because the museum had always made her feel close to her grandmother. He blinked, unsure if it was a joke. Inside, the atrium buzzed with quiet anticipation. The poet was soft-spoken and raw, reading about memory and mourning. At one point she said, "Sometimes we don't return to ourselves. Sometimes we evolve into someone our past couldn't have imagined." Kate felt the words sink deep. Daniel, beside her, nodded like the poem confirmed everything he already believed. And that was the moment it hit her. He still thought this was about going back. Afterward, they walked to the garden behind the museum, surrounded by sculptures and breeze. She leaned against a stone wall, arms crossed. He leaned beside her. "You liked it?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "I did." "You've always loved poetry." Kate hesitated. "I used to." He looked at her. "What do you mean?" I don't know who I am right now, Daniel. And I don't think trying to piece myself back together from memories is the answer." Daniel straightened a little. "I never said that." "No, but that's how it feels," she said. "Every time you talk about who I was, what I used to love, it's like you're building a map back to someone I'm not anymore." He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Kate, I care about you, and I know how much of that old Kate is still inside you." What if she's not? Kate said, voice rising. He flinched. Then we figure out who you are now. Do we? She asked, eyes glinting. Because it doesn't feel like that. It feels like I'm being guided, steered, like you have this image of who I'm supposed to be, and if I don't measure up, you'll quietly start fixing me again. Daniel stepped back. That's not true. She stared at him. Then why does it feel like your love has conditions? Like I only get it if I keep transforming. He looked stunned, hurt even. Kate, I've never tried to change you. I believed in you. Isn't that what people in love are supposed to do? She shook her head. You believed in a version of me that stopped existing a long time ago, and you've been chasing her through me ever since. The wind shifted. A few leaves drifted across the garden path. Daniel's voice was quieter now. I didn't know you felt like that. Kate folded her arms tighter. Neither did I, until I realized I've spent the last 2 months wondering if every step I took made me more or less lovable in your eyes. He reached for her hand. She pulled away. I think I need space, she said, not because I don't care about you, but because I need to figure out who I am without being someone's second chance. Daniel swallowed hard. Okay, he said. She looked at him one last time, then turned and walked down the path, heart pounding in her ears. Kate didn't go home right away. Instead, she walked. Blocks and blocks without direction, just the rhythm of her footsteps against the sidewalk and the noise of her thoughts turning over and over. It was like trying to breathe with a hand pressing against her chest, not violent, but constant, restricting. She ended up at the lake near the old elementary school, the one with the rusty swings and the painted tire sculptures her grandmother had once helped design as part of a community grant. She hadn't been there in years, but the moment she stepped onto the gravel path and heard the wind skating across the surface of the water, something cracked open. She sat on the edge of the bench, elbows on her knees, eyes fixed on the ripples. She had said it out loud now. I think I need space. It hadn't been a threat, not a manipulation, just truth. But the second she said it, she felt it land inside her like a stone dropped into deep water. She needed space, not because Daniel had hurt her, but because she didn't know how to be herself while trying to live up to someone else's memory, even a well-intentioned one, maybe especially that. The next morning, she didn't go to the bookstore. She didn't call in either. She just stayed in bed. There was no dramatic crying, no dramatic anything. She lay under the covers and listened to the old radiator hiss and thought about how quiet the apartment felt without her trying to fill it. Around noon, she got up, made toast, drank water, sat on the couch with her legs tucked under her and opened her journal. For the first time in days, she didn't write for anyone else's understanding. I don't need to go back to being her. I need to give myself permission to be someone else. Not a ruined version of the girl I was, but a new one, built differently, maybe softer in some places, sharper in others. She paused, staring at the words, then added, maybe he was never asking me to change. Maybe I was the one trying to become someone he'd recognize. And maybe that's what hurts the most. Daniel didn't text that day. She noticed. It wasn't bitterness, just the echo of something that had been consistent, suddenly missing. By evening, she sat on her balcony with a mug of tea and a blanket around her shoulders. The city buzzed in the distance, but her block was mostly quiet. She watched a couple walk their dog across the street. They weren't talking, just walking together, not fixing, not guiding, just being. She closed her eyes. She wanted that, but not yet. The following day, she visited the community center, just to sit. She hadn't been there since that first week Daniel had encouraged her to get involved again. Now, without his hand on her back, without his voice in her ear, it felt different, more vulnerable, but also more hers. She watched kids draw pictures with stubby crayons and mismatched markers. One girl was drawing her whole family with bright purple hair and stars above their heads. Another had scribbled an angry mess over the corner of the page and was now folding it into an airplane. No one corrected them. They were just allowed to make things. Kate sat in the corner and let that settle into her. She didn't have to become something legible to be valuable. She didn't have to finish healing before she was worthy of love. That night, she did something she hadn't done in weeks. She made a pecan pie from scratch. It was clumsy. The crust was uneven. She forgot to toast the pecans first. But the smell filled her apartment with something warm, something grounding. Halfway through baking, she realized she'd done it without thinking of impressing anyone. She just wanted to do something different, not from her childhood, from her, now. Daniel didn't text her again. He didn't show up at the bookstore or the cafe or the park bench where they used to meet. Not because he didn't miss her. He did. Every day. In the quiet spaces. In the way he automatically reached for his phone in the morning. In the pause before he locked his door at night, half expecting she might be on the other side. But this time, he stayed still. Not out of pride, out of respect. Because for the first time, he truly understood what she'd been trying to say. She hadn't been asking him to disappear. She'd been asking him to let go of the script. It hit him one night while sitting at a diner booth alone, stirring sugar into a coffee he wasn't drinking. He looked up from the cup and thought, she's not a version of the past I'm trying to restore. She's the future I don't get to control. That thought hurt, but it also set something in him free. Kate, meanwhile, was learning the rhythm of her own days again. There were no more calls from Daniel, no more familiar check-ins. And in that space, she realized something surprising. She didn't feel abandoned. She felt unwatched, and it was strange how peaceful that felt. No one waiting for her to rise, no one expecting her to fall. Just herself, in the present, with a little bit of breath between every step. She didn't know where she was headed, not exactly, but she liked who she was becoming, not a return, an emergence. One morning, she walked to the library and sat in the non-fiction aisle. Not for a shift, not to meet anyone, just to sit on the floor between two shelves and read something she'd never have chosen before. A book on architecture. The chapter was about foundations. That sometimes when damage is too deep, you don't try to salvage what was there. You tear it down. You start over. Not because the old structure wasn't beautiful, but because it wasn't built for who you are now. She closed the book and smiled. Later that week, she bumped into Daniel. It wasn't planned. Just one of those city coincidences. She was walking out of the florist with her arms full of pale yellow dahlias. He was stepping out of the corner cafe with his phone in his hand. They both paused. He looked at her like he was seeing someone brand new, and not in a way that tried to name her. Just seeing. She smiled first. Hey, he said, soft. There was a moment, brief but open, where anything could have rushed in. Apology, history, explanation. But instead, she nodded toward the flowers. These aren't for anyone. Just felt like buying them for the apartment. He smiled. They suit you. She raised an eyebrow. The flowers or the independence? Both, he said. They stood in silence for a moment longer. Kate took a breath. I'm figuring things out. I know, he said. And I'm not waiting for the version of you that's finished. If you ever want someone beside you while you're still in process, I'd be honored. She didn't answer right away, but she smiled, and this one did reach her eyes. Maybe, she said, but I'm walking forward now, not backward. He nodded. That's where I want to meet you. And with that, they went their separate ways. No promises, no pressure, just two people standing exactly where they were, not clinging to who they were, just beginning to understand who they might still become. Kate found the letter on a Wednesday. It was wedged between a credit card offer and a voter registration reminder, sealed in a plain ivory envelope with her name printed in careful, slanted handwriting. No return address, no postage stamp, just her name, Kate Ellison. She stared at it for a long time, still on the doorstep, keys dangling in her hand. The air felt different around it, thicker, heavier, like the paper inside had weight beyond ink and pages. She didn't need to guess who it was from. She knew, somewhere deep she knew. Her grandmother had been gone for over a year, and still, the woman found ways to reach her. Kate slipped the envelope into her bag and stepped inside, heart thudding. She didn't open it right away. She made tea. She folded laundry that didn't need folding. She swept the kitchen even though it was already clean. The envelope sat on the counter like it was watching her. She wasn't afraid of paper. She was afraid of what it would say. Afraid that it would drag her backward when she had just started moving forward. That it would be another map back to a girl who no longer existed. Another pressure wrapped in sentiment. Another reason to feel like she was disappointing someone, even now. And yet, after an hour of pacing and pretending and sipping half-cold tea, she sat down at the kitchen table, slipped her thumb under the flap, and opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, a second folded document, a deed. She unfolded the letter first. "My Kate, if you're reading this, it means I finally let go. Don't panic, this isn't a ghost story, it's just me, giving you one last thing that I couldn't while I was still here. Space. I've thought a lot about how you might feel reading this. Angry? Pressured? Sad? I hope not, but I understand if you do. This letter isn't a command, sweetheart. It's a window. And the door's still locked unless you want to open it. You remember the house in Vermont? I know you heard it was sold after I passed, and it was, but not to a stranger. I asked a dear friend of mine, Helen Walker, to buy it quietly on my behalf. She held it for you just in case. The deed is now in your name. No taxes due. No tricks. No one else knows. This isn't an asset to be fought over. It's a gift from me to you, no strings attached. Go if you want. Or don't. But if you do, maybe sit by the creek again. You always loved the water. I've never wanted anything for you except this, a life that feels honest, whatever that means to you now. Love always, Grandma M." Kate read the letter 3 times. And the thing that made her cry wasn't the sentiment or the surprise. It was the gentleness, the absence of obligation. Her grandmother had given her so many things in life: guidance, safety, expectations. But this was the first time she gave her permission to not go, to not be, to not become anything other than whatever Kate chose. She pressed the letter flat against the table, then folded it gently and set it back in the envelope. The deed remained untouched for a while. Finally, with trembling fingers, she opened it. The property was legally hers, no taxes due, no hidden caveats, just coordinates and an address she knew by heart, but hadn't spoken aloud in years. The house on Elm Creek Lane, where summers used to smell like honeysuckle and old books, where she'd once climbed a tree just to prove to her grandmother she could, then stayed up there until dinner, writing a story about a girl who lived in the branches. She had buried a tin box in the backyard, filled with drawings, secrets, her first real poem. Her stomach turned. She wasn't that girl anymore, but maybe she didn't have to be to go back. Kate didn't pack right away. She left the envelope on the kitchen table, walked past it for 3 days, and told herself she was just thinking. In truth, she was afraid. Afraid that going back would feel like failure. That the house would be a shrine to someone she no longer was. That stepping inside would confirm her deepest fear, that she had become a stranger to the only person who had ever seen her clearly. But every time she poured tea, folded laundry, stared at the half-full journal on her nightstand, her eyes wandered back to that envelope, not because it demanded something of her, because it didn't. And that's what made her curious. She booked a rental car on a Thursday. No announcement, no text to Daniel, no social media post, just a tank of gas, an overnight bag, and a soft ache that tugged her east. The drive was quiet. Snow-lined roads, bare trees. The old GPS clipped to the dashboard blinked like it hadn't been used in years. As the hours passed, she felt time folding in on itself. Not like she was going backward, but like she was driving through different versions of herself. The teenager who once hated small towns, the 20-something who dreamed of city lights, the woman now, quiet, still unsure, but searching. She pulled into Elm Creek Lane just after sunset. The house looked smaller than she remembered, but not sad, just waiting. The porch light was on. She paused at the gate, key in her hand, heart thrumming against her ribs. Helen Walker had done exactly what her grandmother promised. The walkway was shoveled. The mailbox bore Kate's name in neat lettering. A new roof, fresh paint, but the soul of the place hadn't changed. She stepped onto the porch and inhaled. Honeysuckle, firewood, the ghost of cinnamon. She unlocked the door. Inside, the house was simple. Not empty, but not cluttered. Someone had made sure it stayed lived in without feeling borrowed. The quilt on the sofa was hers, the one she and her grandmother had sewn together during the summer of rain. The kitchen clock still ticked in that faint, offbeat rhythm she used to find soothing. Kate wandered through the rooms like a visitor in her own story. She didn't cry, she didn't smile, she just breathed. In the upstairs bedroom, the one that used to be hers, a single yellow notepad sat on the desk, a fresh pen beside it. The page was blank. She sat, and stared, and wrote. I'm not here to find myself. I'm here to let go of the fear that I need to be found. That night, she slept on the couch, wrapped in the old quilt, a fire crackling low. No dreams, just quiet. And that somehow was more healing than anything she could have imagined. In the morning, she walked to the creek. It was partially frozen, water humming beneath the crust of ice, snow-dusted stones dotting the edge. She stood at the bank, hands in her pockets, watching the sunlight break through the trees. She remembered how her grandmother used to sit on the bench nearby and say, "Still water runs deep, so do you." She had always hated how poetic it sounded. Now it felt like permission. Kate crouched by the edge, pressed her hand to the cold bark of the tree she used to climb, and whispered, "I'm not trying to be the girl who lived here. I'm just trying to thank her for surviving long enough to get me here." She didn't expect a response, but the silence wrapped around her like an answer. Kate stayed at the house for 3 days. She cooked small meals, even when she wasn't hungry, walked the same forest path each morning, read from old books she thought were long gone. And every night, she sat in front of the fire with the journal open on her lap, not to capture breakthroughs, but to write things that didn't need to be profound. On the second night, she wrote, "What if I'm not healing toward who I was? What if I'm becoming someone who never existed before? And that's the point? And then, I can be enough even if I'm never fixed." That sentence stayed with her. She wasn't sure who she'd become, or what her life would look like in a year, or what she wanted beyond this stillness. But for the first time that not knowing didn't feel like drowning. It felt like space. It felt like hers. The third morning, she went to the backyard with a garden spade. The snow was thin, melting in patches, revealing the soft, damp earth below. She stood near the tree where she'd once buried a tin box and dug carefully, hands trembling, not from cold, but memory. When the metal lid finally cracked the surface, she froze. The box was rusted. The tape that once sealed it had long since peeled away. She sat cross-legged in the dirt, set it in her lap, and slowly opened the lid. Inside, a crumpled drawing of a girl in the clouds, a bracelet made of yarn, a folded note labeled, "Read when sad." She opened the note. "You're not bad. You're just scared. And scared people can still be kind. Try again tomorrow." She stared at the words, written in her 12-year-old handwriting, and laughed, a short, shaking sound that turned into tears. It was the only time she cried during the entire trip. That afternoon, she cleaned the house one last time, folded the quilt, washed her mug, left the yellow notepad open with a new entry on the desk. "Thank you for holding space for me, even when I didn't know how to ask." She closed the door slowly behind her. The gravel crunched under her boots, and then she saw him, Daniel, leaning against his car, parked by the edge of the driveway. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just stood there, waiting. Kate stopped halfway down the porch steps. "How did you know where I was?" she asked. He nodded toward the road. "Helen called me, said you were here, told me not to follow. I waited." She nodded slowly. "You always wait." "I didn't come to talk," he said. "Just to see you, to see if you looked like someone who was leaving something behind or carrying it with her." Kate stepped off the porch. "I'm not leaving anything behind," she said quietly. "Not this time." He nodded once. "Then I guess I'll see you in whatever's next." She took another step. "Daniel." He met her eyes. "I'm still figuring it out," she said. "Still don't know who I am, really." "I don't need you to," he said. I'm not here to chase a version of you anymore. I just want to know the one in front of me." They stood there a long time. No sweeping music, no grand confessions, just winter air, quiet breath, and two people finally meeting in the present. And when Kate walked toward him, it wasn't to be saved, it was just to be beside him. The city hadn't changed. Kate noticed that first. The same neon coffee shop sign flickering in the early hours, the same crosswalk light that never quite synced with the flow of traffic, the same corner flower stand that sold out of tulips every Friday morning. But she had changed, not dramatically, not in ways anyone would stop and compliment, but in quiet, internal shifts. She walked slower, listened longer, didn't flinch as much at silence. It had been 3 weeks since she left Vermont. She hadn't told anyone she was back, not Daniel, not even Marla at the shelter. She wanted to arrive quietly, not because she was hiding, but because she was re-entering her life on her own terms. That first morning back, she stopped at her favorite cafe. The same corner booth was open. She ordered tea instead of coffee. Sat down, pulled out a blank journal, not the one she'd filled in Vermont, a new one. Soft gray cover, wide-ruled lines. She didn't write anything profound, just a single sentence. "This time I'm writing to remember, not to figure it out." Back at the bookstore, she resumed her shifts. Customers came and went. Most didn't recognize her. The few who did offered polite nods, small talk. Kate smiled. She didn't need to be seen to feel visible anymore. She rearranged the poetry section without being asked, helped a nervous teenager find a first-edition fantasy novel, even laughed when someone returned a cookbook, claiming the recipes were too smug. And she meant the laugh. It came from a place that had thawed. That night, she sat at her window, feet tucked under her, watching headlights thread through the street. She thought of the house in Vermont, the creek, the note she left on the desk. She didn't miss it. She carried it with her. That was the difference. On Friday he walked in. She didn't hear the bell. She was stocking the register with new bookmarks, ones with little stitched quotes on them. But the shift in the air was unmistakable. She looked up and saw him. Daniel. He wasn't dressed up. No coat and tie, just a soft navy sweater, jeans, and a quiet expression. He looked different somehow, less like someone holding his breath, more like someone breathing. He raised a small paperback. "I heard this book was about a man who keeps messing up and somehow still finds a way to matter." Kate tilted her head. "Fiction or biography?" "Does it matter?" he said. She smiled. He didn't walk closer, didn't push, just waited. She closed the register drawer. "There's a table in the back." He nodded once, followed her there. They sat across from each other, sunlight pouring through the old window, dust catching in the light like memory. He set the book down between them. "I'm not here to fix anything." She met his eyes. "I'm not here to be fixed." "Good." There was a pause. Easy, clean. He added, "I think I misunderstood what helping looked like." Kate leaned back. "You weren't wrong for believing in me. You were just doing it louder than I could hear myself." Daniel nodded. "I've spent a lot of time trying to live up to who people thought I could be. I guess I thought I was doing you a favor." "You were, just not the one I needed." They sat with that. He didn't apologize again. She didn't demand he prove anything. She tapped the spine of the book between them. "Is it good?" "Not yet," he said, "but I'm not giving up on it." She smiled. "That's fair." Then she reached into her bag, pulled out her new journal, and set it beside the book. "No poker table this time," she said. "No bluffing either," he replied. They didn't make promises. No what-ifs. Just shared presence. Two people facing forward with nothing to prove. They met again the following week. No arrangements, no pressure. Just a casual bump-in that didn't feel like coincidence, but didn't feel forced either. Daniel had a paperback tucked under his arm and 2 cups of coffee, one black, one with oat milk. He held them like offerings, unsure. Kate stopped, looked at the cup, then at him. "Thanks," she said simply, taking it. He smiled. "Figured you might want something warm." She nodded, then gestured to the bench across from the bookstore window. "Sit with me." They did, and the silence was different this time. It didn't hum with old tension or unsaid things. It breathed. Kate sipped slowly. I used to think if I ever let someone see the version of me that's always unraveling, they'd run. Daniel looked at her. Then you've clearly forgotten my poker face. She turned to him. I haven't. That's what scares me. He didn't joke this time. Why? Because it's the first time I've wanted someone to stay, without needing to be rescued. Daniel leaned back. Then it's good I finally learned how to just show up. She looked at him. Not searching, just seeing. He didn't offer advice, didn't tell her she was brave or strong or any of the words that used to feel like assignments. Instead, he asked, "What does your day look like tomorrow?" And that, just that, felt like the most respectful thing anyone had ever asked her. They saw each other more after that. Not daily, not predictably, but often enough that the rhythm returned. Not the old kind, the new kind. The kind where they didn't orbit around healing or regret or the past. They built something lighter. They watched movies and didn't dissect the themes. They browsed thrift shops for books neither of them planned to read. They started a terrible two-person book club with zero structure and inconsistent attendance. Kate told him about her new journal, the one without goals. Daniel started sketching again. Badly, he admitted, but freely. One night, they ended up at the overlook near the bridge, Kate's quiet place. She handed him a folded piece of paper. "What's this?" "Something I wrote in Vermont," she said. "I wasn't going to share it, but then I realized that's what the old me would have done." He opened it, read silently, then nodded. "It's good," he said. "It's messy," Kate said. "Exactly," he replied. She didn't ask him what it meant to him. She didn't need to. He folded the paper carefully, tucked it into his coat pocket like something worth keeping. That same week, Kate returned to the shelter, not to reclaim her old volunteer role, not to prove she had changed. She showed up, helped sort donations, and left a batch of new children's books on the free shelf with no name inside. Marla caught her before she left. "You look, well." Kate smiled. "I'm not trying so hard anymore, that helps." Marla nodded. "You feel like you again?" Kate tilted her head. "No. I feel like someone new I'm starting to like." Back at the bookstore, Kate rearranged the front table, again. Her co-worker groaned. "You know there's no way to organize books that pleases everyone, right?" "Good," she said, lining up a new stack. "Because I'm not trying to." Daniel walked in 20 minutes later. He didn't interrupt, just browsed. Then, without warning, he called out, "You know the problem with rearranging everything?" She raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Sometimes you forget where the good stuff ended up." She pointed to the shelf. "Try middle left, second row. It's always where the good stuff hides." He picked out a book, held it up. And for the first time since their story had started, since the poker game, since the debt, since the letter and the house and the silence, they both smiled at the same time for the same reason. Because they weren't in crisis anymore. They were in possibility. It was a Tuesday when they sat at the table again. Not the poker table where it all started, not the one laced with risk and desperation and performance. This table was round, wooden, tucked in the back of the bookstore cafe with wobbly legs and a chair that creaked whenever you leaned too far back. It was the kind of table where conversations didn't try to impress anyone, the kind where things could be said and left unsolved. Kate had brought 2 cups of tea. Daniel had brought a pack of sticky notes and a pen. "We need a better book club name," he said. She smiled. "How about Unqualified Opinions?" "Perfect," he said. "And fitting." They sipped. The cafe was quiet that morning, just the hum of the espresso machine and a soft jazz playlist spinning overhead. Daniel peeled off a sticky note, scribbled something, then stuck it on the edge of the table. Kate read it. "Chapter 7 is secretly brilliant." She raised an eyebrow. "That's an argument, not a note." "It's both." She pulled the pen from his hand and wrote, "Chapter 7 is trying too hard." They grinned at each other like they were 16 and passing notes in a library. Later, when they weren't writing, just sitting, Kate reached for her journal and opened it halfway through. Daniel asked, "Still writing to remember?" She nodded. "Still remembering to write." There was a long pause, not heavy, reflective. Then she said, "Do you want to know the real reason I went to Vermont?" He didn't answer, just nodded. She traced the rim of her cup. "I was afraid I'd built my whole life on who other people thought I was. Grandma, you, myself, years ago. And I needed to know if there was anything left under all that." He stayed quiet, which she appreciated. She continued, "Turns out, there was. But it wasn't something solid I could hold. It was something I had to grow into." Daniel looked down at his own hands. "I kept trying to be a man, someone like your grandmother would have respected, but I think I stopped respecting myself for a while." "You didn't look like it." "I know." They sat with that. Not in guilt, in growth. The next weekend, Kate invited him over to her apartment for the first time since everything. It wasn't a dramatic moment. There were no candles, no music, just a stack of board games, takeout, and a couch that dipped too far to the left. At one point, she reached for her journal and hesitated, not out of fear, out of habit. Daniel noticed. "You don't have to share anything," he said. "I'm just glad you still write." "I am too," she said. "It's one of the few things that's always felt mine." She looked at him. "You're not trying to save me anymore." He shook his head. "That was never really the point, was it?" "No," she said softly. "But thank you for wanting to." They watched a terrible movie, paused it 10 minutes in, and never went back to it. They didn't need noise. They were learning to sit in quiet without losing themselves. Weeks passed. Kate started teaching a Saturday morning poetry workshop at the community center. Just 6 kids, some crayons, and a big piece of butcher paper. She didn't tell anyone about it. Not even Daniel. Not at first. She just wanted it to exist, without applause. Daniel started showing his sketches at a local market, not to sell, just to tape on the wall for the day. His caption read, "In progress, just like me." They didn't live in each other's pockets. They didn't merge lives or make 5-year plans. They just stayed close enough to listen, far enough to breathe. One evening, sitting together on the bookstore steps as the sun tucked itself behind the skyline, Daniel asked, "Do you think you'll ever go back to that table?" Kate looked at him. "The poker table?" He nodded. She thought for a moment. "I don't need to," she said. "That girl thought the game would save her. This one knows she doesn't have to play." Daniel didn't respond. He just reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something folded and worn. The note she'd given him in Vermont. He opened it, handed it back. She smiled at the creases. "You kept it." He shrugged. "Some pages deserve to be reread." She looked at the words, then at him, then reached for his hand. Not out of fear or urgency, but clarity. "This is good," she said. "Yeah," he replied. "And this time, no one's bluffing."